Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. A lot happening here on the network. We're live in two different courtrooms. You can go to lawandcrime.com to watch either trial, the Granville Ritchie trial out of Florida, or, of course, the new Todd Mullis trial out of Iowa. That one just started up. Right now on the network, we're going to talk about something new. As you recall, we covered the incredible trial of 20-year-old Brooke Skylar Richardson, who was accused of killing her newborn. She was facing numerous charges, including murder in connection with the death of her baby Annabelle. The prosecution said the defendant hid her pregnancy from everyone, gave birth on her own, and then killed her baby, and then proceeded to burn and bury the body. The defense conceded that Richardson buried the baby, but they said their client didn't kill anyone. Rather, the baby was a stillborn. Well, after several hours of deliberations, the jury found Richardson not guilty of murder, manslaughter, or child endangerment, but she was found guilty of abuse of a corpse. The judge had the option of sentencing Richardson to 6 months in prison, but instead sent her home with time served and gave her 3 years probation. Obviously, this was shocking. It was controversial. A lot of people have thoughts on this. And right now, we're joined by a very special guest to discuss this, Skylar Richardson's attorney, Charles M. Rittgers. Mr. Rittgers, great to have you here on Law and Crime. So I want to start with the most pressing question, something that I've been wondering since the beginning of trial. What's the hair product, man? I mean, literally, you got to let me know what this is. I feel intimidated. This is quite the sight for both people to see this. You got to let me know.
Where's my man, Kenji?
That's like Tom Cruise saying he doesn't, he just uses moisturizer. But anyway, that's a separate topic. To get back to business, really, what's your reaction right now to this verdict, to the sentencing? It was a pretty incredible week.
Very relieved. I'm happy my dad is okay now. The family can rest. And by family, I mean the Richardson family and my own family. As you know, the trial's taken an enormous toll, not only on the lawyers, but most importantly on Skylar and her family. And I hope that the healing process can start for Skylar and her family. Yeah,
this must have been quite the ordeal. And also, as you said, you did this trial with your father. Do you guys usually do this together? Do you try cases together where you split up? Who's going to question which witness? Who's going to handle the opening statement, the closing? Is that usually how it goes?
He and I have only tried 2 cases together in my career, and I've been practicing law now for 9 years. So this was an experience that I'll cherish forever. I really enjoyed learning from him. I've always learned from him, even when we do not try cases together. But having a trial of this magnitude and to be able to work hand in hand with my dad for 2 years and be in the courtroom with him was an experience that I'll never forget.
Well, you guys are a good team. I mean, think about this decision here. Was this a shocker? And I'll tell you why. Let's first start with the verdict. So obviously there were questions about the murder charges, the manslaughter charges, the child endangerment charges. But did you believe that it was going to be very tough to find her not guilty of abuse of a corpse? Did you believe, did you anticipate, did you even tell her it's likely that you're going to be found guilty of this charge?
We did think that it was a much higher probability that she would be convicted of the abuse of a corpse charge. And frankly, we did think that it was a lower probability that she would be convicted of the top 3 charges. Abuse of a corpse in Ohio has an archaic definition, and it is something to the effect of whether or not the defendant outrages the reasonable community sensibilities with the handling of a corpse. And the jury in this case asked 2 questions while they were deliberating, and both had to do with whether or not there was a more formal or legal definition for abuse of a corpse. And it's that definition is just something that I think is difficult for anyone to wrap their head around, even lawyers. And there's just no clear definition.
Yeah, no, and it was good in the closing where you basically said, does it outrage the community sensibilities, and what does that even mean? People thought that she burned her baby alive, and I saw where you were going with that. But going into the sentencing, okay, so now she was found guilty of abuse of a corpse, and obviously it was a relief she was found not guilty of those top charges, and we'll get to that in a second. But now you're going into the sentencing. How did you prepare her for this? I mean, how did you prepare for yourself? Did you expect that she was going to get some prison time?
The law in Ohio is fairly clear that on a 4th or 5th degree felony, in Ohio you have the most serious felonies, which are unclassified, and then the most severe classified is a 1st degree. The least severe felony is a 5th degree felony. which is what Skylar was convicted of on the abuse of a corpse. And judges are told in Ohio, if it is a non-violent, low-level felony and someone does not have a criminal conviction, that they should not place people in prison. So going in, we would have been very surprised had the judge given Skylar prison, and I was frankly not surprised by the ultimate sentence.
Well, as the judge was giving his sentence, he talked about the different political motivations, how everybody's been following this case, and he made the point. He said, look, you have been found not guilty by a jury of your peers, but if you made different choices, Skylar would have, Annabelle would have been alive today. At that point, what are you thinking?
Well, you know, we don't know what would have happened had Skylar made different choices in terms of prenatal care. What we do know is that on April 26th, the first time she saw her obstetrician, she was told that she would deliver a baby within 10 weeks, and she delivered 11 days later. So whether or not an outcome would have been different if she had gotten prenatal care in those 11 days, it's hard to tell. And frankly, it's something that Skylar blames herself for. The fact that she did not get prenatal care and the fact that she had a stillborn is something that she will live with the rest of her life.
Yeah, and at that point, though, as the judge was saying this, did you think the tide was going to turn and that she was going to be getting some prison time? I mean, you might have gone in a certain way, but then after hearing what the judge, it's always hard to predict where a judge is going to go from the beginning of a statement to the end. But at that point, did you say, uh-oh, he might impose some prison time?
I did not think that Skylar was going to go to prison, even as the judge indicated to her what his personal beliefs were about the case. Judge Oda, from the beginning of this case and every other, I've been in front of Judge Oda since I started practicing 9 years ago. And he is a judge that takes his job very seriously. And regardless of his personal beliefs about a matter, he always comes back to the law. And that's all you can ask for in a judge. And he always says, show me the law. And if the law says I should do something and I believe that I should do it, then I will. And so based on the law in Ohio, he sentenced her to what was appropriate.
Okay, and one of the things that he said was that people have a lot of opinions about this case, that people are going to look at this and say no matter what the jury found, they're still going to call her and they're still going to view her as a baby killer. That's something that she's going to have to live with. What would you say to those people? If you have an opportunity to speak out to them here on Law and Crime, you have an opportunity to speak out to the people that still believe she got off, that the prosecution just couldn't prove their case, but they know in their hearts, including one of the former law enforcement experts who testified, still believes that that baby was alive. What do you say to the people that call her and believe she's a baby killer?
A couple things. One, I say that those people didn't watch the entire trial. So if you're going to have a strong opinion like that about a young woman who spent an entire life loving other human beings, including children, and making a snap decision on whether or not she would kill a child, you didn't watch the whole trial. Because I know from a number of focus groups, from this jury and other people that I've spoken with, that those people who watched the entirety of the trial and saw all the evidence, they know that Skylar did not kill a child. I know in my heart of hearts she didn't either.
Now, there are people who've watched this entire trial. We have trial watchers who have watched this entire trial. And one of the things that some of them can't get past is even if they take into consideration that this was a stillborn, that she never killed her baby, how do you reconcile that with the statements and the text messages and the photos taken after the killing? Because yes, you've made a great point during the course of this trial that she suffers from extreme eating disorder, But again, for someone who just went through a traumatic experience of giving birth on her own and giving birth to a stillborn and then burying the baby, how does someone go out and text this kind of relief and take a gym selfie? How do you reconcile that?
Skylar, the two people who received those text messages were her mother and her boyfriend, two people that she loved, two people that did not know that she had been pregnant and did not know that she had just delivered a stillbirth. It would be analogous to a man who is going through a horrible divorce, and his wife is divorcing him, and he's worried about losing his children, and he is putting on a front for the outside world, telling those people around him that he's happy and that now he doesn't have to worry about doing the dishes or making something up to make people believe that he is okay. Skylar was grieving inside, but her entire life, she did not want to put her internal burdens on others and those she loved. And frankly, at the time, she didn't want her mother or her boyfriend to know that she had just had a stillbirth. So those text messages were to two people who had no idea that she had just had a stillbirth.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, in a way that what she's feeling inside is different than what she's expressing to the outside world. The reason I ask you that is because if you go back to the police interview, is that the same thing that happened? Because in that second police interview, where she, even when her father comes in and she says, I cremated the baby a little, and she's giving these detectives these pieces of evidence that the prosecution used by saying she might have hugged the baby too much, she might have squeezed the baby, talking about the burning. Are you saying everything she said there was not true? I mean, in the sense that she was either fed those answers or she just gave them what she wanted. There was nothing that she said in that second interview that was true?
Two things happened in that second interrogation. And one is that Skylar, as I said previously in this call, she does have deep regret and mother's guilt for having this stillbirth. And she had it starting on May 7th. So when these detectives tell her that her child may have been alive, it adds to that mother's sadness and guilt. And yes, I do believe that everything that I know that everything that she fed back to the police about signs of life or about cremation and burning her baby are absolutely false. And we know that because it's scientifically impossible to light a child on fire with a lighter. And they had Skylar admit to something that we know cannot happen. And frankly, that's rare in confession cases. And it was probably the best piece of evidence for us because it showed people she admitted to things that we can conclusively prove aren't true.
And what about the part that she might not have burned the bones? Obviously, the flames might not have hit the bones, but it might have hit the tissue. That was something the prosecution said that, look, they admit first that those detectives went into that room with the wrong information. But the idea of burning the skin or burning the tissue, what do you say to that?
Well, again, the prosecutors doubled down on this burning issue. And what happened was an anthropologist said that the bones were burned and the bones were charred. The prosecutors said, well, it's possible that even though that anthropologist was wrong and later admitted that she was wrong, that Skylar could have burned the tissue of her child and nothing would have been shown at gross autopsy. The problem with that is that in the police report, the police they said that Skylar touched her child's foot with a lighter and that the flames on the child went all the way up to her chest. And in the second interrogation, the conversation surrounding this point was such that Skylar was talking to the police officers about putting out the fire that had ignited on her child, that she had to use dirt, that she had to go shoo with the flames to try to get the flames off her child after touching a child with a lighter. And so we know that that is not true, that does not happen. We're not combustible human beings, that children are 80% water, and it would be the equivalent of trying to light a toilet paper roll that had been dunked in a pool on fire. And so we know that what Skylar said in the conversations that she had were not true. So for the prosecutor to then come in and say, well, maybe all that's not true, but Skylar might have still tried to touch her child with a lighter, I don't think is in line with our common sense.
Yeah, listen, hey, you raised some incredible reasonable doubt in this case, including in the closing argument when you listed out all the reasons why there's reasonable doubt, even if you think it's likely it was a stillborn, or even if you think more than likely than not, and you said that's reasonable doubt. It was pretty incredible to watch, and you raised those reasonable doubts. I guess the question is now, what is Skylar Richardson going through? Obviously, there's been an interesting dynamic with her family, particularly her mother. Given everything that's happened, where do they all go now?
I hope the healing process can start. They're now, for the first time in 2 years, capable of having a formal memorial and burial process for Annabelle, which has been something that has been very important to Skylar and her mom and dad. And the police officers knew that it was important to Skylar and her mom and dad in that second interrogation, which is why they pretended that one of their main points of focus in the interrogation was to get Annabelle's remains back to her family. And I hope that as time passes, this case can fade more into the background of people's memories and that Skylar and her family can attempt to start to heal.
Charles and Rittgers, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate you coming on to talk about what was a very tragic case from a lot of different levels. Thank you very much.
Very true. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. All right, everybody, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have more.